So without further ado, let me introduce to you tonight's speaker. A native of Western Massachusetts, Dave Robison is the direct descendant of several passengers of the Mayflower, a few dozen Revolutionary War patriots, and a scattered trace of Canadian ancestors. He descends from a large sampling of New England ancestors, as well as a large sampling of ancestors from the Deep South. Dave has held many key positions in a variety of genealogical societies, including chairman of the New England Regional Genealogical Society, president of Western Massachusetts Genealogical Society, Connecticut Genealogical Society, Genealogical Speakers Guild, and many others. He holds a certificate of Boston University's genealogy program, as well as a variety of similar resources. Since the year 2000, he has taught a variety of classes and lectures in genealogy research from coast to coast. Dave lives in Chicopee, Mass. with his wife, Karen, a retired nurse, and between them, they have 5 children and 3 grandchildren. With that, Dave, I will turn it over to you.
Well, folks, let's talk about the genealogical proof standard. And I'm not sure how many folks are participating here tonight, but I would just guess that many of you, if not all of you, have been involved in genealogical research in one form or another for maybe a year or two, maybe 20 or 25 years, like some of us. But the genealogical proof standard is a part of becoming a certified genealogist, and it's useful for many other purposes. In other words, the genealogical proof standard keeps you on the right track. When I first started doing this 25 years ago, I would find a document and I would say, oh my God, there it is. And I click, name, date of birth, and all of this stuff, and then move on without proving anything. And then not shortly thereafter, I began to realize that there's a lot of mistakes that can be made with genealogical research. And I'm not blaming anybody, or I'm not saying that people are lazy or any of that. But I just wanted to, we just want to go through the genealogical proof standard so you can see what it is that we're talking about when we say that things have to be a little bit more controlled here. So we'll begin with sources. Now there's a difference between sources, information, and evidence. So we'll start with sources. They can be original, they can be derivative, or it can be an authored work. By original, we mean that someone created a document, or they created or hand-wrote a book or a diary or whatever, and that's original from the author, and it hasn't been copied by anybody, or it hasn't been printed, or it's just the absolute original document. Derivative simply means that you copied it from somewhere. Now that's not an evil thing. It's just because we all do it. I mean, we open up something, we see something that we need, we write down the notes from the book or the tape or whatever it is that we looked at, and that is a derivative source. And an authored work is obviously what it says. It's an authored work. Now, then we get into information. There's a difference between the sources and the information. The encyclopedia, I hate to use this analogy, but the Encyclopedia Britannica is a source. But that doesn't mean that it's the information. You got to get to the book that you need, the volume you need, and open it up and get to the page that you need in order to get the information that you've been seeking. So it's kind of a lousy analogy, but an encyclopedia provides an encyclopedia is a source, and it provides the information that you may or may not be looking for. And the information can be primary or secondary. In other words, someone copied it from someone who copied it from someone, et cetera, down the line. Or it can be just simply uncertain. So you've got the information, you've got the source, you've found the information you need, but there's no author's name and it's not credited to anyone. And that can get a little bit shaky, but this is not the only document you're going to look at when you're doing genealogical research. So finally, the last piece of this is evidence. And this gets confusing sometimes, and I understand why. Evidence can be direct, it can be indirect, or it can be negative. Negative doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Negative might mean that it just contradicts the research that you've already done, or it contradicts some of the documents that you have found. And those are the 3 categories within the genealogical proof standard. Next, we go on to elements of the genealogical proof standard. Gathering the evidence, and the question here is, when is enough enough? Now, in my case, I make myself crazy because I might find something that seems to be the information I'm looking for, but I force myself to not be satisfied with that one single solitary bit of information. I go and I look for other sources that can corroborate what I've already found, or maybe it contradicts what I've already found, but it just means that your research isn't done yet. The next element would be complete and accurate source citations. Where and when did the information originate? And this is very, very important because many people will write something and they'll post it on the internet or they'll put it on a blog somewhere. And it's because their grandmother's aunt's next door neighbor told them something and they wrote that down and they take it as gospel. Now, I'm not criticizing those people. I'm just saying that it's not a good way to do good genealogical research without having more than one source. And get those handwritten notes or the diaries that you find in the attic, or letters that are sent back and forth. They're not necessarily accurate, and I'm not saying that people wrote these things to be inaccurate, but in a lot of cases, they simply guessed at the information. They think their Uncle Clem was born in 1924, so they put down Uncle Clem or Clem whatever, 1924, without any other documentation to prove what you're trying to tell them in your reports. So gathering the evidence is important, and sometimes it just doesn't stop. You keep going on and on and on and on, and until you probably just want to give up, or you just want to cut it off at some point. But complete and accurate source citations, where and when did the information originate? That's also very important when you're trying to show someone the research that you've done and what it is that you've accomplished in all of the years that you've been doing research on a particular family or individual or whatever the case might be. Let's see. Oh, I pushed the right button. There we go. Skilled analysis and correlation of data. Test the facts. Now, here's where a lot of oddball things come into play. Handwriting is a nightmare. It really is, especially 17th and 18th century handwriting and the way they abbreviated certain things. And I know that just the letters, it looks like the letter YE. When you look at a tombstone, for example, YE is not pronounced ye, it's pronounced the. The YE is called it's called oh God, what do they call them? A thorn. And they put the E sometimes in the crook of that what looks like a letter Y, but there's alphabets, there's lettering, there's numerical sequences, there's all sorts of things that can give you all kinds of problems in the 17th, 18th, 19th century research that you've done, handwritten research. So you need to test the facts. In other words, you might find some information, and it might say so-and-so was born on such and such in such and such a year, but it just doesn't correlate with all the information that you've already gathered. So we have to figure out which bit is the truth or close to the truth, and with which bit is actually an error on somebody's part. But analyzing what you found is critical. Next say is resolution of conflicts, resolving the conflicts. And this can be a real challenge because you may have more than one author about a particular event, and where have you seen that lately? And you have to figure out, or at least do a little bit more research and try to find information or sources that will verify or support the information that you've just found or that you found a long time ago, and you're running across it again. And you've got to get those conflicts resolved. And I don't want to say that you have to spend a whole year or 2 or 3 or 5 just on one little bit of information, but it's best if you get as many sources as you possibly can to resolve those conflicts of data, resolution of conflicts. And finally, the last element of a genealogical proof standard is a soundly reasoned, written conclusion that details all the evidence, analyses, and documentation that you've gathered. So those are the 5 basic elements of a genealogical proof standard. And I'll be glad to answer questions at the end if questions are popping up in your head right now. So, thorough and exhaustive research. What is thorough and exhaustive research? At home, you find letters or diaries or official documents such as birth certificates or military records or marriage certificates, divorce certificates, death certificates. There's all kinds of things that you might find in your home. And that's what you've got to dig for. You've got to find all of the things that you can possibly find and start at home. There's no sense in taking an airplane off to Salt Lake City when you can just dig around your house and find plenty of information. And a lot of information that by the way, if you have any of these kinds of documents in your cellar, please, I'll give you a few minutes to leave the meeting and go get it out of the cellar and put it up in a dry space, because a cellar is probably the worst place you can store documents. Believe me, I've run into that many times. But at home, you've got in most homes, let me say that there will be letters and diaries and all sorts of things that envelopes. My mother, for example, many years ago got lots of cards when my sister was born. And I mean a lot of cards when my sister was born. 3 years later, I was born, and no cards. I didn't get any cards. Just my sister got them all. Anyway, so let's move on here. Town or city halls. And for the most part, that the folks that staff town halls or city halls can be very friendly, because that's what their job is to keep track of these records and to provide the public with the information that they need, as long as it's legal to divulge that information. So in some states, they won't release death records or marriage records or birth records, or there's all kinds of things that can cause problems. But for the most part, most town halls or city halls, the folks are generally friendly and are willing to help, and they're glad to help. Well, I'd say the same thing about libraries, librarians, archivists. They're also very eager to help. But besides birth, marriage, and death records, and you'll find property transfers, you'll find probate records, and you'll find all kinds of different records that might lead you to resolving a situation. Military service records are readily available, mostly online. There is some terrible fires that occurred in the 60s or 70s, I think, and thousands of documents were burnt and irretrievable. But beyond that, military service records can be extremely helpful and should be available to you. Church records, and walk carefully here, and in my experience, most non-Catholic churches are glad to help you get the records that you need. The Catholic Church, however, years ago, it was almost like you're asking them to cut their hand off or something. I mean, to ask for a piece of paper. It was just a nightmare. But that has since softened a great deal. So for the most part, the way I see it anyway, and what people tell me, that nearly all churches are willing to share the records that they have rather than keeping them under lock and key for no reason other than to keep them away from the public. But church records can be extremely handy. And I've discovered many times that someone was married to a different spouse in an earlier day, and then they were either divorced or the spouse died, and then they remarried. And those kinds of things can be uncovered in church records, depending on location. I mean, if you moved from California to New Hampshire, then that could pose a problem in its own. Scouting records, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, or Scouts in general. There's plenty of records to be found there. Social groups such as the Moose Club, church-related Cubs or clubs. It should say clubs, but those folks also have a great deal of information that you might be able to get a hold of and transcribe or make copies of, or take pictures of them and bring them home to help enhance your research. Archives and libraries. I'm sure most of you know what you can get out of a library, and for the most part, many of the libraries contain archival information. They've got it up on a shelf somewhere, and being kept in a extra carefully. These archives usually have they're either bound up in a binder of some kind or in a box. But for the most part, archives and libraries can be a tremendous source of information. School records, and I would say that that's kind of a shot in the dark, I guess, with school records. That sometimes you can be successful, and other times you get shut down immediately. They won't help you with anything, but it's worth the chance. It's worth at least asking for the information. And the very, very, very useful source is newspaper articles. I don't know who amongst you might have subscriptions to Genealogy Bank or to newspapers.com or any of the other newspaper collections, but some of the things you can find in these articles will just be absolutely amazing. Except for me, when I'm looking through these newspaper articles and I see an advertisement for a 1932 Ford or Chevrolet or something, I've got to read that whole page about cars, and I get distracted with those kinds of things, or sports. I can get completely distracted with that, and I've got to snap out of it and get back to the research part before I get too lost, but it happens. Finally, family members. Now, this can be a win or completely lose situation. The best way I can put this is if you've got a parents or grandparents that escaped from whatever country, anywhere in the world, and came to the United States, they very often might not want to talk about anything, and I've run into that quite a few times. And usually it's the next generation that's willing to discuss what they know, if anything, about their family, regardless of where they came from. So the family members can be a fountain of information, or they can shut you down almost immediately before you even get into any kind of an interview. So next, Genealogical Proof Standard. And this component is called Complete and Accurate Citation of Sources. So what this means basically is being very accurate. Now, there's all sorts of books on how to write source citations. There's a book that I have, Elizabeth Schoen Mills. She has written and rewritten a book that's almost 800 pages long. And I mean, it's just, you'll go crazy trying to read all the laws and rules and regulations of writing a source citation. But Elizabeth Schoen Mills is a very, very accurate, very intelligent, very highly experienced person. And it might do some of you good to order some of her books, or go on Google Books and just find anything that relates to writing an accurate source citation. And they have to be, when you're doing this on a professional level, the information has to be given in certain sequence, and you got to watch out when you use a colon or a comma or a slash mark or parentheses. It just makes you crazy a little bit. But that doesn't mean that if you're doing this for yourself or for your family, and you're not going to be submitting this to some fancy genealogical society, then as long as you have most of the information that you need, the name of the book that you found, the author of the book, the chapter or the page where you found the information, the year the book was published, et cetera, and that would be a sufficient source citation. Don't tell anybody I told you that, but that's what I believe. But again, if it was going to be, if you're, for example, trying to become a member of, become a certified genealogist, it's very, very fussy. They're very, very fussy on how these things come about. And I don't know why this all dropped open. Did I skip over something here? All right, well, we'll keep going. Town and city halls, birth, marriage, family members. All right, we got to keep going after this. Next page. There we go. Archived materials. And I'm sure that up there in Portsmouth, there's probably, maybe there is, maybe there isn't, either a section of that library or a room where important documents are being kept and being archived. And it's a real science to archiving material like that. You have to use special sleeves that don't have chemicals in them that'll draw the ink off the paper, special boxes. There's all kinds of things that have to be taken care of if you're going to look at archive material, and handling archive material that somebody be standing over your shoulder, depending on what it is that you're looking at. Public documents, like we talked about earlier, at city halls and town halls, or any other place that hold public documents, you should be able to get information from. And again, complete and accurate citation of sources. Where did you find it? What was the title of the book, or the source of the title of the book, or the title of the magazine that you found it in, and the author and the dates and all the rest of it. That's very, very important. Court records can be eye-opening. I know that's happened to me, finding out that some of my ancestors, and not that far away ancestors, had some dealings with the courts. And I always used to joke about the easiest person to research is a criminal, because there'll be police records and newspaper articles and all kinds of court records, and that would make life easy, unfortunately, if one of your relatives or ancestors was a criminal. But anyway, courts records. What's next? School records might not be as open as some of these other sources are, because the nature of the school, if it's a public school, that's a different story. But there's Catholic schools, for example. There's just no way you can get records out of those Catholic parishes for a period of time. I don't know what it's been like in the past few years, but that can be a difficult situation. Family held records. I can't tell you how many times I've stumbled over an aunt or an uncle or someone that said, "Oh, by the way, are you interested in this?" And they hand me this gigantic pile of family research. It's delightful to get all that business, but it's also a bit of a challenge to read what they've written and what they've put together for you, and to prove that what they wrote and what they've recorded for you is accurate. A very quick story, if I could. My dad was born in Evergreen, Alabama, and moved north, and that's a long story. But 25 years ago, I was flying all over the country, and I got close to Evergreen once, and I drove up to Evergreen Library, and I said to the Evergreen Historical Society, I says, "My dad was born here in Evergreen." I said, "Is there any way you can help me find any of the records on my dad?" And the woman got all excited. She said, "Oh my God, your father was born in Evergreen." No, 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 no. She said, "You need to get a hold of Mrs. Sarah R. Coker." And she's been researching genealogy for 20 years, 30 years, however many years it was. She was 80 some odd years old. She had macular degeneration. She never had a driver's license, and she never touched a computer. But she had mountains and mountains of records that she had done unbelievably superb research putting these records together. So I got home, I write a letter to Mrs. Sarah R. Coker, "Dear Mrs. Coker, blah, 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 blah." And she sent me back a letter that said that she was my aunt. The R in her name stands for Robison, Sarah Robison Coker. And I didn't know the woman existed. And as a matter of fact, she had 7 siblings, so there were 8 kids in that family altogether. And I knew my grandfather existed. I never spoke to my grandfather, and he died when I was 15 years old. But I never ever spoke to him or saw a picture of him. And I had absolutely no idea that he had 7 siblings. And it was quite an amazing find for me. First of all, to find Aunt Sarah, and to find that she had all these documents and all the things that that helped me put that side of my family together. My mother's side was real easy because, well, I should say real easy. It was comparatively easy because, for one thing, we're Mayflower descendants. I have 5 passengers of the Mayflower that are I directly descend from, and those records are all over the place. It's really kind of hard to not be successful putting that stuff together. But when you're stonewalled completely, your own grandfather doesn't share information with you, and you have to wait for all of those uncles and great uncles and great aunts to go by the wayside, and you find somebody like Aunt Sarah. It's just like an unbelievable bonus. In addition to that, I had a half uncle who was worked at Duke University in the DNA lab in 1964. And I found this out because one of his siblings brought me or sent me a booklet that he had written. He and a colleague had written. Now, I couldn't read it. It's way too technical, way too scientific. Plus, it was written in 1963. But that book and the fact that he was a great uncle or a half uncle of mine, I was able to track down many, many, many relatives. By the way, that particular uncle drove, there was a Chappaquiddick situation in reverse. He drove into a lake with his girlfriend, who happened to be pregnant at the time, and the baby that was born of that marriage, I have spoken to and corresponded with. And that to me is an absolute miracle. Of course, his wife was pretty angry that he wrecked the car, but that's another story. Family held records. Next, church records. We talked about this a little bit ago. Many churches are very helpful with their records, and the Catholic Church has been coming around. I'm not trying to beat up the Catholic Church by any means, but in my experience, it was so difficult to even get those folks to talk to me, much less hand over paperwork or books and records and all sorts of things. But church records for the most part. And so many Catholic churches have closed down, and many other denomination churches have closed down, or the buildings have burned down, or whatever. There's very often those records have been given to another church or another parish, or they might be around somewhere, and that might be worth digging into. Social organization records. What I mean by that is moose clubs and all sorts of different social organization records that you might be able to find either at the office of the organization or perhaps at the library or at City Hall, but you can't discount social organization records. Next, in the Genealogical Proof Standard, we're talking about skilled analysis and correlation of data. Okay. Analysis of positions held in social clubs or societies, the Mayflower Society, the Daughters of the American Revolution, Sons of the American Revolution, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a good idea if you latched on to someone who has belonged to any of these organizations, and there's many, many, many others beyond that. But for the most part, you can find some very interesting information on some of those. In some of those records of social clubs and societies. Schools or grad schools attended in the records if available. They, if you know what these schools are, whether it's a high school or a 4-year college or whatever, if you can get to those records, you can be very beneficial. And I say accurately identified photo albums. And this was the bane of my existence for the longest time. I have a scrapbook that my grandfather kept back in around 1910 or 11. And in 1913, he worked for the Canadian Pacific Railroad, or Grand Trunk Pacific Railroad up in Canada. And he wrote in that diary every single day. For example, he would say, it's Sunday morning. He said, I washed my shirt today. Not my shirts or any other piece of clothing. I washed my shirt today. And that's the only information I got from that page. And then on other pages, he said, there's simply, we walked into town and came back, or they they did this or they did that or the other. Every single page of that 1930 diary has some information on it. If you can make it out. He had horrible handwriting and he couldn't spell to save his life. But I was pretty good at finally figuring out all the things that he wrote. So much so that I took on Facebook, I took a picture of the page of the diary. I did this in 2013. Took a picture of the page, then I put a transcription of the page and posted that on Facebook every day for the year 2013. And that was a little project that I made myself crazy over. But the problem with the photo albums, there's two problems here. First of all, in those days, they glued the pictures to the page of the album. You know, those black pages that they just either stuck pins in them or they put this glue. These pictures are all glued off. And I've asked many, I shouldn't say many, I've asked a few archivists, what can I do to get these pictures off the page? And their answer was absolutely nothing. Don't even try to take the pictures off because it'll be ruined. Now, I know that a lot of the people that my grandfather mentioned in his diary are probably pictured in this album. And I know which one my grandfather is because he always wore a hat. He always had a hat with I don't know what kind of a hat you would call it, but every picture that's in there where there's a man standing with a hat on, I can get close to that picture and recognize my grandfather in there. But the other problem with the photo albums, not just the people gluing the pictures to the page, the other problem is if you put them in, if you go to Staples and buy just a plastic sleeve and you stick the pictures in it, the plastic will actually absorb some of the picture itself. And by the time you come around to take the picture out of that sleeve, there's nothing left on the picture part. It's all stuck on the plastic. So there are archival sleeves that you should use if you're putting away for future purposes, if you're putting away photographs or documents of any kind. But the good thing about photo albums is if you do have a photo and it has someone's name on the back, and certainly I hope it would have more than just grandma or granny or whatever they might have on there. Who knows what the name was, but I'm recommending to everyone, if you do put together an album, that you should write on the back of the album, right on the back of the picture, the event where the picture was taken. It might have been a wedding, a funeral, it might have been a baseball game, it might have been just a family picnic or whatever. And then write the names of the people that are in there, are in the picture, not just Auntie May or not just Uncle Clem or whatever you want. But the full name and the date that the picture was taken, and all of that will be greatly appreciated by future generations. Of course, today we have all kinds of electronic ways to take pictures and record them and keep them for posterity. But if you do have a box of pictures and you know who those people are, I strongly recommend that you flip them over, and ideally you would get an archival pen, which is it's like a marker, but it has a very thin tip, and the ink will not bleed through to the front of the picture and ruin the picture. But that's what I recommend that you do with a picture. And in the meantime, if you found an album that has names and dates and so and so's wedding or so and so's first baseball game or whatever it is, those are certainly a treasure. Timelines are important for the simple reason that, well, I guess the best way to explain it is sometimes when you're creating a timeline and you're reading the documents and you're trying to put the event on a particular spot on that timeline, sometimes or many times that you will find that people just didn't know how to write very well, or so that 1923 might look like 1928, and all kinds of other examples like that. So putting together a timeline is very, very helpful for a whole host of reasons. For example, I had somebody put some of my family up on the internet. Somebody that was born, I don't know, she was born in 1840 something, no, 1820 something, But the problem is they skipped a whole generation, and they had this woman who died in 1870 something having 3 kids in the 1880s, which is impossible. But that was the record that I was presented with. So if she didn't have any kids after she died, I can assure you of that. But some of that could have been cleared up if they had done a specific timeline for that woman's life. And that's, I mean, I just laughed about it, and I managed to fill in the blanks and get the timeline done accurately. What's next? Career records. What did he do? Was he in the Navy for his entire life? Was he a CO of some company? Was he a policeman for his entire life, or did he bounce from job to job to job? Career records can help to tell the story. Here we go with resolution of any conflicts in the evidence. And I think I mentioned somewhat conflicts in the evidence where the dates are probably wrong or can be wrong. And I don't blame anybody if they wrote down about 1921 or circa 1936 or whatever, just so they're admitting to you that this is probably not the accurate year, but it's pretty close to what I believe the year should be. But if somebody just puts down a year with no proof, then it's hard to take it as gospel, if you will. So, and those are the kind of conflicts you need to resolve within the evidence that you've put together. An individual can't be in 2 places at the same time, and I have certainly run into this many times where a particular family lived in Kansas City, Kansas, in the same year the same family lived in Auburn, Maine, for example. And it takes a bit of sorting out, but more than most of the time, it does make some sense because they moved during the year 1930 or whatever, and you can sort it all out that way, if anything. But they certainly can't be in 2 places at the same time. Naming discrepancies. First of all, I believe that many people go by a nickname. And I'll give you an example. Somebody's looking for Joseph Smith, and they can't find Joseph Smith anywhere on the planet Earth, but they could find a Michael J. Smith. I'm just giving you an example, a Michael J. Smith. And funny, this Michael J. Smith was born the same year in the same place as Joseph Smith. So a little bit more digging and finding the parents and finding the places where they lived, et cetera, you can resolve a discrepancy in a name where somebody might go by a nickname or somebody might use their middle name because they didn't like the first name that their parents gave them, or whatever the reason is. And I'm sure there's people in the audience tonight have run into those kind of discrepancies. Naming discrepancies, which can cause headaches. Family trees with supporting evidence. Those are important. You'll find a family tree that has oodles and oodles and oodles of source citations. And those are the kinds of family trees you want to pay attention to. When I first started putting a family tree together, I didn't pay any heed to supporting evidence. And I said, oh, well, I know my uncle was this, and he was married to her, and they had these kids. And I know my grandmother lived here, and she was married to so-and-so. So I can make out that stuff pretty easily. But when it got to be great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents and all that, it started to become a real issue for me in trying to figure out how to get the correct information. And it's more than just a piece of paper that might have written his date of birth or something on it. It's not an official document at all, but maybe a birth certificate or a marriage certificate or military records or school records or whatever the case might be will help you to put the correct dates. Name changes, aliases, something as simple as misspelled names in places, etc. Spelling doesn't count, and I should have put that in there. Spelling doesn't count in most of these records. I can't tell you how many times that I've seen the surnames well, I would say they're misspelled, but I've seen the surname spelled 3 different ways. And I'll give you a perfect example. My paternal line goes back to Tennessee in the early 1700s. So I believe that his name was Jonathan Robertson, and his children were named either Robison or Robson or Robertson. It didn't really make much difference. That's what they wrote, and that became the record. And then as they come down the line, there's 3 or 4 different ways that my surname has been spelled. My 4th great grandfather was a veteran of the War of 1812, and when he died in 1854, his widow was able to apply for a pension, but sometime in the 1870s or 1880s, much after the war. But nonetheless, so she applies for this pension, but she was rejected 19 times because she wrote, or she had written for her, she couldn't write, she wrote Robison, but the records that the military was pulling up had Robinson, Robertson, Robson, they all kinds of different things, and they couldn't prove anything. Make a long story short, she finally got it proved that she was the widow of Hezekiah Robison or Robinson or however you want to pronounce it, and she finally got her pension of $8 a month and 100 acres of land in Iowa. Now, she lived in northern Alabama her entire life, and she was 80 some odd years old when she got that 100 acres of land in Iowa. So I'm assuming that she just sold it to somebody and she never moved. But misspelled names are very, very common, and you just have to be careful, in what you do and how you record it and how you try and correct the spelling in a lot of these cases. So the final aspect of a genealogical proof standard is a soundly reasoned written conclusion that details all the evidence, analysis, and documentation. And that's what a genealogical proof standard would be comprised of. So now we get into the question and answer period.
If anyone has any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask them out loud, or you can put them in the chat and I can ask them out loud to Dave.
I did see someone made mention of Catholic Church records, but I didn't have a chance to read it when it popped up.
Yeah.
Did you see that by any chance?
Yes, I did. It's in the chat. It says, speaking of Roman Catholic records, AmericanAncestors.org has Roman Catholics sacramental records from the Boston Archdiocese. Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Boston records from 1789 to 1920. They are indexed and records themselves are online.
That's great information. Thank you for that. And I don't know who gave you that, who gave us that information.
Sue McCann.
Sue McCann. Thank you very much, Sue McCann. Anyone else? And as I had said earlier, and particularly with regard to the Catholic Church, they have greatly loosened their grip on some of these files and documents, and it's a lot easier to get information from them now, much more so than it was earlier.
Dave, can I just tell a quick story?
You certainly can.
Okay. The quick story is that I've been searching for my grandmother for
Excuse me for 1 second. Excuse me for 1 second. And what's your name?
My name's Tylene.
Tylene. Okay, I met you about a half an hour ago, right?
Yep. Okay, Tylene speaking. Okay.
Yes.
So I was searching for my grandmother. She was born in Kentucky. She died in what I was told was St. Louis. However, Kentucky did not start keeping vital records till 1911. And so therefore she was born prior to that, and I could not find her birth date at all. So what I did was I went to the county in Kentucky where she was born and did a little research and did find out that that county kept a school census. So I was able to search it online through the County Historical Society, the school census, and it listed her birth date with her father and her sister. And that matched the census of that time. So you have to not go different places. You find things where you least think you're going to find them.
Yes, that's right. I'd rather find them in the attic, but that's not always the case. But thank you for that. That's very important information. Someone popped something up here in the chat, and someone mentioned the Drouin collection, Drouin. And the only comment I have about it is the records are very accurate. However, you have to deal with the DIT names, DIT. So you might find somebody, I'll do this in English because my French is long gone. They might find somebody who is James Smith DIT Jones, DIT Jones. And that can cause you a lot of grief and aggravation. And there's a few different reasons why they use DIT names. They used them in France up until about the 17th century, as far as I know. But the folks that migrated or emigrated into Canada continued that tradition for quite some time. So those DIT names can drive you nuts. Anyone else? Let's see. Any suggestion for record in the 70s? Oh my God. Gail says records from the 1700s in New England. You will drown in records here in New England. And I would suggest if you can get, explain DIT names, please. I think I just did. Or maybe I'll get back to that. Yes, I assume I can. I will talk about that. The archives in Boston. Now, I don't know how excited you are about taking a trip to Boston to the Massachusetts State Archives, but there's a place where you can get lost in all of the things that are available to you. And for the most part, a lot of the things that are available in these brick and mortar establishments, they're now coming online, and you can find all sorts of things on the internet. And if it comes from a reliable source, like the Portsmouth Library, then you can pretty much count on the information being accurate to the extent that the original stuff was accurate. Someone says, what are your go-to online public databases? Okay, let me talk about DIT names first. That was the first question. A DIT name was, let's say the Smith family was leasing farmland from the Jones family, and they might have used the name Smith DIT Jones. Also, and that's an oversimplification of that. Also, they might have used a DIT name to honor an ancestor. They might have used a DIT name to honor a religious figure or a military figure. There's a few instances or a few reasons why DIT names became popular, but they went out of style, I guess, probably in the late 1800s. I'm just guessing, but they can cause you some problems. Are you looking for Smith or are you looking for Jones? Does that answer your question, Julie? What is a DIT name? The word DIT means say, so it's Smith, but say Jones. And that's the easiest explanation I can give you. But when you run into these names, French Canadian, mostly 100% of the times, you'll have a first name and then you'll have two last names with that dash between the two last names. And that's how they were recorded, and that's you got to keep your eyes open to understand that. And if you can't find Mr. Smith, and I'm Americanizing all this stuff, if you can't find Mr. Smith, but your record says it's Smith Jones, then you got to go look for Jones as well. There was a question that popped up I didn't see. Is there a question I haven't answered yet?
Yes.
Which one?
Are your first go-to online public databases? And how about when you need to find international records?
My go-to is, it's like a toss-up between FamilySearch.org and Ancestry.com. And the reason I like FamilySearch.org is they have more records than anybody on the planet. And it gets a little bit confusing, but I could do a whole class on using FamilySearch.org. They have so much information at FamilySearch.org that you'll be up late nights every night for the rest of your life trying to read everything that they've got. But they have lots of information on particular surnames. They have a lot of information on locations, cities, religions, just all kinds of things. If you go to um, um, oh my God, I can't think of it off the top of my head. If you go to FamilySearch.org, and first of all, I have had people say to me, that's the Mormon church. I don't want the Mormons coming to my house trying to convert me to a Mormon. That will never happen. I have known Mormons for 25 years, and not a one of them has ever said to me, let me talk to you about the book or whatever book they use on it. Not one has ever said that to me. Anyway, and after FamilySearch.org, I would look at Ancestry.com. And both of these sites are getting bigger and more elaborate, and they keep, quote unquote, improving them, which drives me nuts because you get used to one way, and it turns out they've changed that so it's the other way, and that absolutely makes me crazy. But there's so much educational business. Oh, if you go to FamilySearch.org, in the upper bar, if you go to Wiki, WIKI, and then it'll give you all the categories where you can find information on any country in the world, any surname, any city, town, state, ocean, island. It doesn't matter. Give it a shot. FamilySearch.org. And yes, you have to. Do you have to get a membership there? You might have to, but that's neither here nor there. It won't affect you personally at all. I can guarantee you that. Okay, what did I miss here in questions?
Do you have any go-to databases for international records specifically?
FamilySearch.org.
Great.
FamilySearch.org. And if you go to that, if you open up the home page and you find the wiki in the bar across the top where it says this category, that category, and it says wiki, click on the wiki, and let's say you're trying to do Polish research, which is a nightmare trying to dig through all of the things that country went through and the citizens went through over the past 100 years. I would go to FamilySearch.org and go to the wiki, and then when it asks you first thing you'll see is there's a map of the whole world in the center of the page, and you just simply have to click the category that you want information on, and there are hundreds of them. So if you want to look at just Poland, you can just look at Poland, and it'll give you what country specifically would you be looking for?
Julie, are you still in the? Oh yeah, Julie's looking for Ireland.
Ireland. Excellent, excellent, excellent. They have an unbelievable amount of information that you can use to research Ireland. Absolutely. FamilySearch.org.
Wonderful. Any other questions?
Well, I see a thank you, and you're welcome very much to everyone. I hope that you got something out of this. And now that it's over, I will tell you that I had a gigantic difficulty here about 3 or 4 hours ago, and I just put this together in the last 20 minutes before this thing was supposed to start, because I got all kinds of electrical problems, but we got over it. But I don't want to whine about that at the beginning. I'm just sharing with you now. So hopefully everybody learns something and can improve your research immensely. Hopefully. All right.
Excellent. You did so well, Dave. I never would have known you threw this together in 20 minutes.
Okay, 30 minutes. I'm sorry.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Dave, and teaching us about the Genealogical Proof Standard. And thank you to everyone for joining us, and especially the DAR for co-hosting this program, like all of our genealogy workshops. And we hope to see you at the next one. Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye now.
Bye, Dave. Thank you so much. Have a good night, everyone.